So is using cash in a cashless society good for you, good for society, or bad for you and bad for society? Actual cash, physical dollars. Is this good or bad for you in the economy? Today, we're going to discover why you might want to use cash or accept cash as a business owner and why you might not want to. What are some of the dangers of it? And we have the expert on this, Professor Jay Zagorsky from Boston University, who wrote the book, The Power of Cash, why using paper money is good for both you and society. So I think that's a very important part of what we're talking about today, because we're talking about the global and we're also talking about the individual. And Jay, it's really just a pleasure and a privilege to have you on the Wealth Ability Show.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's great to be here.
And if you would give us a little of your background, why this focus on cash money?
So, about a decade ago, I was invited by the Federal Reserve of Boston to participate in a survey to help design a survey to see how people were paying for things. Because the Federal Reserve was kind of concerned that people were moving away from cash and they wanted to figure out how people were using various electronic means. At that time, when I showed up at the Federal Reserve, I was a credit card maximizer. My goal was to accumulate as many points and miles as possible. And with those points and miles, about a decade ago, I went on sabbatical. My wife and I, we traveled 3/4 of the way around the world, business class on frequent flyer miles. And my wife was quite happy about that. And then I started digging into the data, and I suddenly realized that my personal use of credit cards at 100% of my spending and society's use of electronic payments was actually having some some problems in the world.
Okay, so let's start with the world. Okay, you say it's causing some problems in the world, and this is an interesting subject, Jay, because we've seen China go to a digital currency. We've seen the Fed actually talk about and then pull back from a digital currency. Trump said we're never going to have a digital currency, but Trump's only there for 3.5 more years. So who knows what will happen after that? Biden actually went down the direction of a digital currency. So there's quite this battle going on between the digital and the physical. Why do you think it's a problem that we would go to a fully digital currency in the world?
Let me talk about three big issues from sort of a macro point of view. And the first one is privacy. When you have a totally digital currency, especially one that runs through the central bank, then the government knows everything you're spending. And if the government doesn't like you, it can shut off your electronic wallet and preventing you from spending any kind of money. So that gives governments incredible amount of control over people's lives. Whether they choose to exercise it or not, can't tell you. But I can certainly tell you that it gives them the ability to do that. But not everyone's worried about privacy. A lot of people say, oh, privacy, that boat's already sailed. We don't have to worry about that. So I'd like to talk about two particular issues that are really important. Number one, there's been an increase in the number of natural disasters. As a quick example, we've seen wildfires in Los Angeles a few months ago. Before that, we saw wildfires in Hawaii. We are seeing an increase in tornadoes and torrential rains right now in the Midwest. Depends exactly when your listeners are going to watch this video, but I'm sure there's some calamitous weather event happening. Electronic payments work when there's electricity, when there's communications, and when there's secure computer networks. And when there is a terrible weather event, electricity and communication networks fail, which means in the very moment that you need to spend money, you need gas to get away, you need food, you need water, you need medicine. That's the very moment that electronic payments let you down. And cash works even when it's soaking wet. That's the second point. The third point is we have lived for the past number of decades in a very peaceful society. Relatively few wars. I know the headlines suggest there seems to be wars all over the place, but they're relatively minor. We're not seeing world wars like in the 1940s or in the 1910s. During wartime, and there seems to be increasing conflict happening in the world. During wartime, a country can basically want to blockade its enemies. And how do you blockade your enemies? Today, if it's a truly electronic society, basically you can shut down the banking system electronically.
Well, that's basically what Biden did with Russia, right? Was
Mhm.
shut him out of SWIFT, which is effectively shutting him out of the world banking system.
When you get shut out of the banking system, you can't do things. To go back to the Biden example, there were a large number of Russian tourists abroad in places like Thailand or in parts of the Middle East, sunning themselves on beaches. Suddenly, a war broke out and they couldn't pay their hotel bills. They couldn't get a taxi to the airport. They were stuck unless they had paper money, and most of them didn't. So, paper money works when there's natural disasters. Paper money works when there's war or the threat of war. And paper money, it gives you privacy and removes government control. Now, a lot of people might be watching this video and say, okay, great. He's convinced me. I'm going to go run out, pick up a couple $100, stick it under my mattress. I'm going to say that isn't the right solution. And it's not the right solution because if you just hoard paper money, it's not useful in an emergency. It has to be used continuously. What do I mean by that? If you're an entrepreneur, your business needs to accept paper money so that you know what to do with it when an emergency happens. If you're a shop owner or you're a merchant, your people need to have procedures to handle paper money. You can't just do it, oh, wait, the power went out. What do we do? Accept paper money. It doesn't work. Let me tell you a quick personal story. I went to the supermarket about a week ago and I was supposed to get 40 cents change for my order. And the person sat there and they looked at the nickels and dimes and they couldn't figure out whether to give me nickels or dimes, so they gave me 4 nickels. And I was like, no, no, that's 20 cents. That's not 40 cents. Uh, and the head cashier had to come over and explain to them the difference between nickels and dimes. And afterwards, okay, I get it. I get it. You know, dimes are worth 10 cents, nickels are worth 5 cents. But I was kind of flabbergasted that this person had used cash so little that they couldn't tell the difference between a 5 cent
Well,
coin
and
and a
you
10 cent
illustrate something I think that's important is that when we do something physical, our brains connect. This is Montessori's idea, right? That what the hand does, the mind remembers. And so if I'm out here, so I always carry cash, and I actually carry cash because I got stuck once without cash. And I actually had invited somebody, a friend, to lunch, but I'd let him choose the place. And the place
coin.
only the restaurant only accepted cash. And so he actually had to pay for lunch, even though I invited him because he chose a place that only had cash and I didn't have cash. But it just, to me, it pointed out. And ever since then, I've always carried a goodly amount of cash and I use it. And typically I use it when I travel. I use it. I don't, some places I don't want to use it. If it's too big of a purchase, I tend not to use it. But I like the idea that what you're talking about here with the waiter is that it actually makes you do math. So it actually forces you to understand. And for those of us who are old enough, I mean, we always used cash. That's what we had. We didn't have credit cards. We didn't have debit cards. We had cash. As kids, we had cash. But what it does is, to me, is it's a great way to teach kids, especially. Okay, it's not all electronic. But let me go back to so that's the danger of it. Let me go back to a bigger danger, which over the last few weeks, there's been some turmoil in the markets. And so what happens, for example, you talked about wartime, but can you explain what happens in a bail-in, for example, or what happens if, okay, all of a sudden, your money's it's not a digital currency. It is actually, the currency we have now, but you're using the banking system and you have money in the bank. What could they do? And what could happen to the money that's sitting there in the bank?
So I wouldn't worry too much about that money disappearing. Instead, what I'd worry about is something called debanking. And debanking affects everybody in the economy. As a quick example, Donald Trump, the president of the United States, just sued Capital One for saying that he was debanked. A number of his bank accounts were just shut off by Capital One. And when you get debanked, that basically means the bank says, nope, you're no longer a customer here. And you might suddenly, be using your credit card, your debit card, or your mobile payments. And if the bank decides that day to shut you off, that's when the account is closed. Now, they give you your money back. They don't steal your money in any way, shape, or form. But the idea of being debanked is that banks are required by the federal government to look for suspicious transactions, suspicious people. And they're required to basically shut off bank accounts of those type of people. And you don't know exactly what's going to cause you to become suddenly debanked, right? There's no official rules. You do this, or that. There's stories of people who've done, transfers of money to their relatives in a foreign country. Oh, that triggered being debanked. So if you have cash and you get debanked, well, it's not really a big problem. Now, I don't know exactly when people are going to listen to this podcast. I hope very quickly. But let me tell you a story of just a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago in Canada, there were a large number of protesters who
Right.
didn't want to follow the COVID restrictions. Many of these protesters were truckers, and they started driving around in their home cities, honking their horns, waving signs. And many of them converged in Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada, and they started driving slowly in circles, honking the horns around Parliament. And the head of the Canadian government got very upset. He said that this was shutting down the institution of government, and he declared emergency measures. What were the emergency measures? He gave him the power to arrest the protesters. Now, we think of Canada as a liberal democracy, that people have the ability to protest, drive around slowly in their trucks, honking their horn. But what he did was even more insidious. He not only arrested the protesters, but he debanked them. He basically looked up their license plate numbers, not he, but members of his staff looked up their license plates and told the banks to shut off their accounts. So these people were arrested and couldn't post bail, couldn't buy food or water, couldn't do anything because they no longer had money electronically. Now, if they still had cash, they could have posted bail and gone back to protesting. They could have, gotten hotel rooms. They could have gotten food. But if you become debanked, then you don't have access to any of those kind of things. And this happened only a few years ago in Canada. I would say one of the most liberal democracies in the world.
So you talk about not don't put it under your mattress. I mean, we all know we've all seen over the last few years the cost of inflation. And if you'd stash a whole bunch of money under your mattress 4 years ago, it's worth a lot less today than
It
it
is
was four
indeed.
years ago. So couple of questions. I'm going to ask a couple of practical questions, and you can give me some broad answers. That's okay. Don't expect to give specific advice. But how much money are we talking about? I mean, what kind of money are you suggesting that you have on hand? And so I've got three questions. How much? How would you use it? But the other question is, okay, so you go to the bank, they start asking questions when you get over a certain amount that you're asking in cash from the bank. So how do you deal with that? So can you kind of take those in order?
So hopefully I can remember the order. I recommend having about 3 to 4 weeks worth of cash on hand. 3 to 4 weeks, or what you spend, so keep a quick track of how much you spend over, say, a month. And that's roughly the amount of cash. I don't recommend storing huge amounts of money in your home. In particular, I don't recommend storing huge amounts of money because if people rarely go to the bank, let's say they get out ten or $20,000, and then they only go to the bank, 6 months later, banks then start closing branches, banks start removing ATM
Hmm.
machines. So by going to the bank fairly frequently, say every couple of weeks, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks to pull some money out, you're telling the bank, please keep these ATMs around. Keep having the ability for me to pull cash out of the banking system and put cash into the banking system. I recommend not only do people keep around 3 or 4 weeks worth of cash on hand for emergencies, but they also use cash at least once a week. If you use cash once a week, and I'm not telling you the amount, maybe it's just for a lunch, maybe it's for something else, you're telling merchants, you're telling shop owners, cash is important for me to keep using. Uh, I'll be honest, I do have a credit card in my wallet and I do use it. Uh, I use it roughly of all my purchases, and I've been keeping track over the last year. About 50% are done in cash and 50% are done electronically. Just sometimes I don't have enough cash on me. Quick example, I love going to Costco, the big box store, And Costco's a bit like a treasure hunt. Oftentimes I go in to buy one or two items. I have enough cash for those one or two items, and I walk out with, an entire shopping cart loaded to the brim. And my
You're
wife's
not
like,
alone on that one, Jay.
right. So, I have cash for roughly what I'm going to spend in Costco. And if they have some wild things that I really want, I just throw it in. I know I have a backup credit card there. But the key idea is that, roughly half the times I go to Costco, I do pay cash, and roughly half the times I use my credit card.
Now, they're
Now,
a good example of a business that actually appreciates taking cash, and they always have cash available. I actually find that you can spend, used to be that the goal was to keep a Costco bill under $100. Right now, it's 200. Right? It's kind of can you keep it
uh,
under 200? But
mine's
it can be 300 or 400. They don't have any issue with cash, but some businesses do. So can you talk about, you mentioned that businesses should accept cash, and what are the benefits of accepting cash for the business? For the business, I'm not talking about for the consumer or for the broad economy, but what are actually some benefits to accepting cash as a business owner?
So as a business owner, and let me be very clear. If you accept cash, there's two big advantages. The first one, instant payment. If somebody paid cash, that payment is good. With a credit card, could be a chargeback, someone could
Yep.
dispute the payment, all kind of things, and you might not see that money for a while. The holdback period could be a week, it could be 2 weeks. It really depends on your type of business and the type of credit card you're accepting. The second is you get to pass on lower prices. If Visa, MasterCard, whatever is charging you 2.5%, then most businesses increase their prices by 2.5%. If you're using one of the buy now, pay later systems, which guarantee payment, all right, so that there is no chargebacks, some of them are asking up to 5, even 6%. So, yes, accepting electronic payments allows your customers the freedom to pay with electronic means, and that helps many customers who don't have enough cash. But for you as a business owner, first, you're not guaranteed payment, and second, it costs you a fair amount of your profits to not accept cash, to accept electronic payments instead.
So one of the issues, of course, is that presumes you have physical people physically coming into your business. So if you have a store, et cetera, that your Costco, people are physically there. What if you're not physically there? I mean, you mentioned in one of your articles, you told the story about trying to pay your taxes in cash and how challenging that was, and how you kept they kept trying to talk you out of it.
Mm. I did. I tried paying my taxes in cash to the IRS. And as we record this, we're coming up pretty close to April 15th. And that was one of the most frustrating experiences of my life, especially since every piece of paper money that I've been using here in the United States basically says, this bill is good for all debts, public and private. And to me, my taxes are my biggest public debt. And I
Right.
tried to make it as simple as possible for the IRS. I went to the bank, got very crisp bills. I had exact amount. There was none trying to ask them to make change. I went in there with all the forms filled out. I'd done everything ahead of time. And they just were like, oh, this is very, very hard for us to accept cash. And it doesn't necessarily have to be hard to accept cash. And after I wrote that article, I got a number of emails and phone calls. And the most interesting phone call I actually had was from somebody who runs a marijuana dispensary in the West Coast. And she said, by law, I have to accept cash,
Interesting.
which means I have to pay the government. I'm trying to be an honest business owner. I have to pay the government, my taxes every single, both month and quarter, it depended which type of taxes she had to pay. Uh, and I try and bring cash in, and they're just not able to handle it. And I thought that was actually kind of a very interesting thing.
Yeah, so they
Because
actually have a challenge accessing the banking system, and so I
you,
mean, it's a real problem for that industry. I know that. I know of cases like that. Let me ask you a question. Why do you think, Jay, that why don't governments want to accept? Why do they make it hard? Why do businesses make it hard? How does it benefit them to make it hard for you to pay cash?
So let's deal with the government one first, and then we'll deal with the business one second. Governments, I think, are under a misplaced idea, and that wrong idea is that if we make everything electronic, it's relatively easy to track everything, and the amount of cheating in society, the amount of criminal activity in society will go down. And what I'd like to ask your listeners is this. Imagine there's a number of drug cartels out there in the world, number of mafiosa, sex operations, gambling, these kind of things. If we eliminated cash, do you think the drug cartels would say, oh, there's no more cash in society, let's just close up shop and go home? Would we talk to the mafia and say, okay, there's no more paper money, we're just going to stop all of our illegal activities? And I think the answer is pretty simple, that it doesn't matter whether cash exists or not, that people are going to be, who want to be corrupt are going to be corrupt, whether paper money exists or not. And if
Well,
people
and yet,
honestly,
have you ever had a contractor at your house that said, "Hey, it's $120 if you give a credit card, but or a check, but it's $100 if you pay cash." You know full well that that's because they're not going to report that $100 on their income tax.
I do, but if we eliminated cash, that contractor would probably come up with another way of basically trying to cheat the IRS. That people who are interested in cheating the IRS are going to cheat the IRS whether paper money exists or not.
There you go.
And the simplest story that I'd like to tell your listeners is a couple of years ago, the government of India was very concerned about people cheating on taxes, people using cash in the cash economy. And what they did is in a single stroke, they eliminated 86% of all their high value bills. So basically, all high value, 86% of their money, basically took all the high value bills out of circulation instantaneously and said, sorry, you have to take your old high value bills, come to the bank and explain to us if you have more than a relatively small amount of money, where you got this money from. Okay. Very simple idea. Let's eliminate all tax cheats. Let's bring all that cash into the, we'll call it the, into the day of light or the day. All right. What happened? No change in tax revenues. All right. Some serious analysis were done a couple of years after the fact, and the Indian government did not pick up any more tax revenue. So that was an example in the real world where a major country, not a small one, but a major country basically wiped
Well,
almost all cash off the table, introduced a new type of bills, and they didn't see any increase in tax revenue.
the euro has done that. The U.S. has eliminated some of the larger currencies. There's been talk about the U.S. eliminating the $100 because they are worried about counterfeit, and that's where the $100 bill is what is used the most in large illicit transactions. So they talk about that a lot. So that's why the government says that they would want to do it. What about big business? Why would business want to not take cash?
Ah, businesses don't want to take cash for a very simple reason. If we eliminate cash, we cause people to overspend because it's not real when you like tap your phone or swipe your credit card or insert your debit card into a machine. It's just sort of electronics. We'll pay for it later, or I don't actually know my bank balance, whatever it is. And this is the exact same reason when you go to a casino, you bring
Yep.
cash in, they hand you chips, and then after you gamble, you take your chips and cash out again. Why doesn't casinos, why do they need to have all these people in cages transferring chips into money and money into chips? For a very simple reason. When you're gambling with chips, it's not real. And it's the same idea with credit cards, with debit cards, with mobile payments. When you're paying electronically, it's not really real. You just get by, do it. And businesses see much higher conversion rates, which is why they like electronic payments. Now, the downside, as I mentioned before, you have to pay higher fees and you don't actually get your money right away. But in exchange, people sort of have this, it's not real. And because it's not real, they overspend. And businesses like overspenders.
You mentioned the casino. I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, at giving a presentation not too long ago, and they put me up in the casino. That's where the nice hotel was, and I'm walking in to go to the restaurant. And one of the things that's always struck me with casinos is how fast the slot machines went from a physical pull and cash to a button and no cash. Just put your card in, we'll just let you use a button, and people push that button so much faster than they could pull the arm, right? And so anything that facilitates spending money, right, which to your point means that on the other side, as the consumer, it actually holds you back from spending money. So it's actually a friction against spending money. So as a business, you want to reduce that friction to get people to spend more money. As a consumer, though, you want to increase that friction because you really want it to be a little harder to spend money. That's why, I think parents like to give their kids dollar bills. The tooth fairy does not leave a debit card. The tooth fairy leaves, well, these days leaves a $5 bill, but it was a quarter when I was a kid. It's a $5 bill now, but that's the
You're showing your
inflationary
age, Tom.
aspect.
You're showing your age.
I'm happy with my age. But that's the inflationary aspect of money, right? Is that, and so if you really want to protect your spending, and then one of the ways to do that is with cash, I think is one of the things you said. So, where do you think it's go? Where do you think
Before
it's
you,
go?
hang
Yeah,
on.
go ahead. No,
Let
go
me
ahead.
interrupt you. So, this is the book that I wrote, The Power of Cash, Why Using Paper Money is Good for You in Society. And in the conclusion, I actually talk about that very word you were just mentioning, friction. And we have made ourselves into a frictionless society. And being a frictionless society, while that's great for some businesses, especially online retailers where they just want you to click buy, you see something, click buy, and it shows up at your door in a few hours, it's not necessarily good for society, right? And I realize your show's not about society, but we have a number of problems. We have problems with gambling, as we just discussed in casinos. We have problems with alcoholism. We have problems with drug abuse and things like that. And here I'm in Boston, in Massachusetts. Um, there's certain ways that I'd like to recommend in the conclusion of this book of adding friction back in. Quick example. Uh, sports betting is legal right now in Massachusetts. I can pull up my phone. I can make bet, on any kind of sporting activity almost instantly. And we don't necessarily want that in society. In the old days, when you used to bet, you have to go, let's take the
Right.
horse track or something like that. You had to go, stand in line, hand someone some cash, and then pick whoever you thought the horse was going to win. And then you come back, cash your ticket out. Today, it's look at your phone. This is what I want. This is what I want. This is what I want. And people can get into deep trouble. By adding some frictions back in society, we can reduce these problems. So my recommendation in the conclusion of the book is that for, we'll call it sin activities, drinking, smoking, gambling, and some of the other sin activities, we make them into all cash activities. So you want to gamble? No problem. You have an app on your phone, but you have to pre-fund it by actually going someplace and handing cash over to that person. As long as you're winning, bet as much as you'd like. But when your account goes to zero, you need to show up with cash in hand at some place and reload your phone, reload your account. That little bit of friction makes people stop. Like, wait, do I have any money? Instead of going into debt. Same thing I recommend for alcohol. You want to drink? Knock yourself out. Drink as much as you like, but you need to pay for it with cash. You don't have cash? I'm sorry, you can't drink today.
Well, it's the same reason I like to see taxes actually show up and you having to pay tax instead of having it be withheld. To me, it's the same issue, right? Out of sight, out of mind. And
Mhm.
it's one of my favorite scenes on television is Rachel on Friends. She gets her first paycheck and she's looking at it and she's going, who, who the heck is this FICA guy taking all my money? Right.
Exactly.
And that's the issue is that we don't see it. And if we don't see it, we don't pay attention to it. And cash actually helps us to pay attention to it. So I love this discussion, Jay. I love what you're doing. Again, the book is The Power of Cash. I'm a big believer. I, I've been keeping cash on hand. I use cash. So I think it's a really valuable tool. And I think using physicality is actually a really good way from a CPA's viewpoint. I'm an accountant. It's a really good way to kind of train your brain as to, okay, do I really want to spend this money? Is it really something I want to do? Because I'm going to hand over something physical as opposed to just tap my phone or tap my credit card. Thank you, Jay. Outside of the book, where could we go to find out more about your studies?
Oh, I'd say the easiest one is just search on the internet, type Zagorsky, Zagorsky. There's only one of me who's doing a large amount of studies on a whole variety of topics besides cash. Or you can go to the Questrom School of Business, which is where I work, homepage, and you can see many of the other articles and topics that I write about.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And just remember, while we might not be willing to go to the efforts to pay our taxes in cash, there are other things that we can use cash for. And when we do, in the end, it's not how much money we make, it's how much money we keep. And that's why on the Wealth Ability Show, we're always talking about making way more money and, more importantly, paying way less tax. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks for joining us on the Wealth Ability Show.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.